Well, in order to understand the current turmoil in the Palestine, it's important to understand the historical context. Historically, the Jewish people have claimed that this land belongs to them. They cite holy scriptures and religious books to substantiate their argument, and they say that they have always been there and they were kicked out from that land multiple times, and historically it was the part of the Roman Empire. And with the rise of Islam, it was captured by the Muslims, Arabs, and it remained under the multiple rulers of the Muslim world. Finally, it was in the hands of the Ottoman empires, and it remained into the hands of the Ottomans until their decline just after the First World War. And according to a census of 1887, the vast majority of the Palestine was Muslim, and according to a census of 1887, almost 87% of the population was Muslim, 10% was Christian, a very tiny minority was Jews, only 3%. Then this area was captured by the British Empire, and that allowed the immigration of the Jews and between 1920 to 1939, according to some statistics, more than 300,000 Jews migrated from various parts of the world, mainly from Europe. And then in 1936, this mass immigration forced the British to put an end to this migration that infuriated the Jewish terrorist group, especially Haganah, that carried out attacks not only against the Arabs, but the British Empire as well. And then, the Second World War erupted, and it created a wave of sympathy for the Jewish people because of the Holocaust that killed more than 6 million Jews. And but even then, we will have to go a bit in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where more than 10 nations used to live, and all aspired to get their own nationhood. And there was a great Jewish leader who turned out to be the, founder of Zionism. He also first tried to create a Jewish state within that empire, but then circumstances convinced him that that's not possible. Then he started focusing his attention on the Palestine. So the Jewish people did not have majority in the Palestine, but because of the imperial policy, they started migrating towards the present-day Palestine, and this is how they got a significant presence there. And then there were so many imperial conspiracies. For instance, most of the Arabs states were nationalist, and they had a sort of inclination towards socialism or the then USSR. And as it is famously said, that an Ulster amidst the hostile Arab states. So they wanted to create an Ulster, like in the Ireland, they had a friendly, sort of political entity. They wanted to create the same entity inside the Arab world. So the Europeans helped create this new state, and the British at times made different promises. They made promises to the Palestine. They said one thing to the French and maybe another thing to the Jews. And in the aftermath of Second World War, there was a wave of sympathy for the Jewish people. And then finally, British handed over the current present-day Palestine, or the State of Israel, to the United Nations, that announced the partition plan, and with the equal amount of land distributing between Israel and the Palestinians. The Palestinians rejected that plan, saying that it is the continuation of the European colonialism. And then 1948 war erupted, and in which Israel controlled, or rather captured, more than 1/3 of the area that was initially designated for the State of Israel, forcing more than 300,000 Palestinians to migrate. And some people go to the extent of claiming 600,000 Palestinians, and their descendants now are numbered around 7 million, living in various parts of the world, including Jordan and several other parts of the Middle East. And then this tension continued. Then we had this Six-Day War in 1967. And at that time, what we call Ghaza today, and another part that is run by Mahmoud Abbas. So these parts were divided into different countries, or they were controlled by Jordan and Egypt, and they were taken over by Israel during the war of 1967. Then they needed to decide what to do with these parts, and they started settlements there. And today more than 250 settlements are there, which according to international law are illegal, because Gaza and other parts which is ruled by Mahmoud Abbas, they are, according to international law, there cannot be any settlement. These are Palestinian territories, but now more than 200,000 Jews are living there, and Israel, according to its detractors, has created a sort of apartheid there. There has been a network of roads connecting mainland Israel to these settlements, but according to international law and the United Nations, these settlements are illegal. So the initial partition plan was that the Jerusalem would be a sort of an open city. It would be open to Christian, Muslims, and Jews, because it houses holy sites of the people belonging to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. In East Jerusalem, Muslims have a significant presence, and according to some, they constitute majority, and the Palestinians want this part to be the future capital, while there are Jews, and especially the hardliner Jews, who consider the entire Jerusalem as their territory, and people like Ariel Sharon and then Netanyahu, these are the people who say that they are doing nothing but to exercise their sovereignty over an area that is already theirs. So in East Jerusalem, there is a certain part, Sheikh Jarrah, where around 70 families have been living there. They have been living there for a long time. Now, Israelis, or rather settlers, use the court of law. So they approached the High Court of Israel that handed down a verdict against these 70 Palestinian families that have been living there, or asking them to vacate that place. And the Jews, the ultra Jews, or especially the hardliner Jews, they started forcing them to leave that area. And then during the same time, you have Jummatul Wida, there was another celebration on the part of Israel. They were marking 1967, the day when Jerusalem was captured by Israel. So the people who gathered in Al-Aqsa Mosque, they started showing solidarity with these 70s family. That escalated into a sort of conflict, and protest erupted, not only part of Jerusalem but other parts of Israel where Arabs are living. And then Hamas set an ultimatum to Israel, asking them to withdraw their troops from Al-Aqsa Mosque. And when Israel did not do that, they started a barrage of attacks that have killed 9 civilians. And Israel resorted to sledgehammer tactics, using extreme force, and some detractors called it brute force, that has killed more than 119 Palestinians so far, wounding around 1,000 or more than 1,000, destroying a number of buildings, forcing a lot of people to migrate from the Palestinian territories. And unfortunately, international community is silent. It's not extending its support. It's still resorting to the mantra that Israel has a right to self-defense. Now the problem is that what will be the aftermath? Some people say that it is the irrationality of Hamas, because Hamas knows very well that with the very meager military resources, they can never defeat Israel. Israel has one of the most efficient armies in the world, and 1967 war stunned the world when it destroyed the armies of several Arab countries, or rather their air forces, within no time. So Israel, there is no match between the military might of Israel and that of Hamas. Even then, some people accuse Hamas of picking fights, of infuriating or triggering a conflict. But there are others who believe that it's mainly Israel, because now hardliners are competing for political influence. So whenever they have to do it, they just try to start a conflict, and that conflict somehow help them garnered the support of the hardliner Jews, the settlers, and other people. So it has a political angle. So there is a political angle for everyone. For the hardliner Israeli parties, it is a way to gain more supports from their voters. For Hamas, it is also an opportunity to prove their jihadi credential and their credential of resistance. They say, look, we are the only force. It has also provided an excuse to Mahmoud Abbas to postpone the election, which he fear he will definitely lose because of his hobnobbing with Tel Aviv or Israel. So it is there is sort of an opportunity, a political opportunity for all the stakeholders. There are some critics who believe that if the United States and the European powers condemn Israel, in a way they would be condemning themselves, because it was they who established also settler empires. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States itself, they are all settler states. They exterminated the local population. And Israel, the establishment of Israel is in a way is the result of colonialism, and all the Western powers have been colonial powers as well. So it is important. But above all, naturally, it is the economic interest. Jewish community is thought to be one of the most influential communities across the world. They are into business, they are into trade, they are into scientific community. So, and they enjoy great influence inside the United States and United Kingdom and parts of Europe. Then, of course, there is a wave of sympathy as well. Still, many people sympathize with them because of the Holocaust and because of what happened during the Second World War with them. But of course, they will never, since the Jewish business community especially enjoys a lot of influence inside the United States and several parts of the European continent. That's why it's difficult for them to take a position on that. Current situation, Israel may be testing the patience of Joe Biden and his inclination, because he is different from Donald Trump. So far he has proved that he is not very keen on throwing his support behind the Palestinians, and the American statement or the statement coming from the European continent resorting to the mantra of Israel has a right to self-defense indicates that they all stand with Israel. Ideally, if Israel recognizes 1967 borders, there could be peace, but in realistic world or in realistic terms, it's very difficult. Because now there are so many Jews living in the Gaza, and in other Palestinian territories. It's difficult for Israel to pull them out, because they are living in settled colonies with schools, even one university, hospitals, and entire infrastructure. But this conflict has other aspects as well. Recently, we heard that Saudi Arabia and Iran exchange positive signals. Now the situation in Palestine has put those who want peace in Middle East, especially in Iran, in a weak position. It has strengthened the hardliners inside Iran, and for the time we will see that there would not be much normalization of relation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that would be because of the situation in Palestine.